Welcome, dear listener. Tonight we will travel to Middle Ages. Tonight's main topic isn't knights, kings, or castles. You'll hear stories of medieval peasants and the hardships they faced. Have you ever considered what medieval women endured? Daily tasks that seem simple to us today were incredibly difficult, sometimes even life-threatening back then. Step into a smoke-soft cottage, feel the straw remember your shape, and follow a year where oxen practice philosophy, seasons levy their taxes, and a spindle becomes a passport. If this cozy story helps you drift off, please subscribe, tap like, and leave a gentle comment. Your support keeps the journey continues. You wake before anything has quite decided to be morning. The cottage is a single patient lung, breathing smoke and quiet, and the straw tick under your shoulders has memorized the shape of your back with the loyalty of an old dog. The hearth keeps a red idea of fire under last night's ash, and a little horn window loosens the dark one spoonful at a time. Somewhere outside, a rooster clears his throat like a self-appointed mayor. You do not argue with him. The day, like a miller with a measuring stick, has opinions and intends to collect them. There are no switches to flip, only things to touch. Your hands find the hooked iron to pull a coal forward, the tinderbox with its flint and steel, the bundle of kindling that smells of resin and punctuality. A rushlight, humble, slightly smoky, stubborn in its cheer, waits on a clay saucer. You untie the night with the businesslike motions of someone who has done this since they first learned what smoke felt like in a throat. The cloak you pull over your shift is thick, peasant woven, a remembered sheep compressed into warmth. Its hem has a fringe of little testimonies, straw seeds, burrs, and the occasional mystery fluff that the cat insists is art. The latch-string yields with a small metal sigh, and the door shoulders open, bumping the world with its wooden forehead. The village lane is a dark gray ribbon whispering toward the fields. Frost has scribbled its quick white handwriting over the yard, and your breath is briefly visible, a modest miracle you could pocket if you had very talented pockets. The well stands where it always stands, storybook stolid, with its rope polished by hands your grandmother called neighbors, and their grandmothers called neighbors too. The bucket goes down, singing a soft wooden note. The pulley answers like an old bird. You draw water and carry it home in a yoke that looks like a shrug, but is really an agreement with gravity. Some mornings you think the yoke and your shoulders are married. They certainly bicker like it. Inside, the hearth accepts the news with a hiss. Kindling becomes flame, flame becomes permission, and the cottage remembers how to be bright. The clay floor is ridged with yesterday's hurry and the week's weather, mud prints and paw marks, a small miracle of family geography. The bread chest in the corner is a wooden rumor about prosperity. You lift the lid and listen with your eyes. Bread enough for today, perhaps tomorrow. Certainly a reminder that the Lord's domain and the miller's toll are facts, not theories. Breakfast is ale that tastes of barley and weather, a heel of bread that tastes of summer efficiently stored. Hunger sits with you like a quiet relation. He doesn't complain, he doesn't have to. You know his face. Outside, the animals submit their petitions. The sow greets you with grateful rudeness, a conversational style she perfected early and sees no reason to update. The chickens tilt their heads in that side-eyed way as if you are a peculiar statue that has just learned to walk. Your hand scatters grain precisely, your mind counting silently, your mouth already measuring the morning. An egg is found like a tiny sun kept in a straw nest, and you feel the day tilt slightly toward solvency. A pail of kitchen scraps whispered into pig feed becomes a ledger entry in meat, not now, not soon, but someday when winter sharpens its pencil. Tools are the furniture of your life. A wooden rake with a tooth missing, honest about its limitations. A hoe that remembers your posture better than you do and will correct it tomorrow if you forget today. A scythe sleeping under oil like a dangerous idea taking a nap. A whetstone smooth as a river secret. The handcart that announces itself with a front axle squeak you mean to fix and never quite do. You notice these things without stopping to think about them, for the same reason a sailor notices the wind, not for poetry, but for survival. By now the lane is awake. Feet pass the door, then voices, then a laugh that might be a cough. A neighbor nods the peasant nod, a small diplomatic exchange that means everything and nothing. Someone trundles a barrow past with the exaggerated patience all barrows require. Two children shuttle a goat that doesn't believe in straight lines. The smith's place down the lane begins to breathe in iron language, a gentle chink that will grow into confident clanging once the bellows remembers its duty. The church bell floats a note across the gray, more suggestion than command. In a place where most tasks repeat in circles, the bell is a metronome for hope. There is work you owe to your own plot and work you owe to the Lord's. The balance is never exact, but exactness is a luxury for parchment and indoor people. Today, your hours must bend first toward the field that answers to your name. The soil is wet sweet under the top crust, black in the way that means business. You take the plow handles, and the oxen lean forward with their philosopher's patience. Oxen understand only a few things: forward, grass, the occasional mystery of a gate. But they believe in those things thoroughly. Their breath draws little clouds on the air, and their hooves beat an unsentimental drum. The coulter's edge, sharpened by evening candle and whetstone gossip, parts the ground in a line that almost could be called straight if you stand at an angle and forgive it a little. Each furrow is a conversation conducted without words. The plow tells you where the roots are hiding, where stones have moved under the winter's thinking, where yesterday's rain made an argument with drainage. Your hands are the line on which these messages arrive, and they will be smudged with ink you cannot wash off until someone invents soap that understands dignity. You swing your weight into the handles in the old rhythm, left, right, the subtle lean of a shoulder, until the earth and you agree. When that agreement holds, it feels like the world saying yes in a language older than Latin. At the edge of the field stands the hedge, untidy and authoritative. Sparrows gossip there, and a slow robin looks like a sensible bead on green string. Beyond, you can see the manor's domain, its soil worked by many hands that owe many hours measured in tally sticks and memory. A bailiff walks that way sometimes, counting the day into parts with a piece of chalk, reducing the sweat of many backs to marks so neat you could almost admire them if they were not arithmetic done on your skin. He is not cruel, only competent. Systems do not need cruelty when they have competence. They collect their own. The sun climbs in a reluctant way, a late riser even on days it means well. Just as your back begins to argue, the clouds ask a question that only rain can answer. A spatter, then a steadier persuasion, then the field shining in beads. You adjust because adjustment is a habit more than a skill. The oxen lower their heads and continue in their excellent philosophy. You think of the sower's apron you will tie on in a fortnight, the neat toss and step movements that turn hope into geometry. You think of stooking sheaves in late summer, the stack like a loaf too big for any table. You think briefly of the church porch, safe dry stone, a habitual haven. And you keep the handle steady because thinking is free but bread is not. When the rain withdraws to the hedge like a sulking guest, you straighten your spine and hear it crackle softly, like a fire when someone drops on a wet stick. You smile, not because anything is funny, but because smiling is like adding oil to a squeak. You whistle the oxen a bit of tune your mother swore would cure blight. It did not cure blight, but it did make the work feel less alone. Across the field, a neighbor lifts a hand in a question, and you answer with a hand in the answer shape. Later, there will be mutual help, a borrowed rope, a shared mallet, two backs under the same log. The village is a net woven out of small gestures that pretends not to be a net. Still, when you fall, it remembers to catch. By mid-morning, the ache in your calves has become the kind of ache you stop noticing until a stool reminds you what sitting is. You call a halt that is more like a comma than a period, and perch on the field's familiar stone, a gray, patient companion rounded by centuries of thighs. The bread you saved from breakfast has downgraded its enthusiasm, but not its purpose. The cheese has a brave smell, more persuasive than you feel. A pear, if there is one, is a brief argument for sweetness, soon overruled by practical chewing. You drink a mouthful of ale and think of the brook that feeds the mill, of the mill that feeds itself first, of the miller who must listen to grain all day and has learned to make the grain pay for the privilege. A lark scrawls its music above you, opening air into space, and for a minute you believe the old story that birds carry scraps of prayer in their wings. Your hands rest palm up, brown with the day, a map of lines that can be read by anyone who understands tools. A little boy runs past chasing a wooden hoop with a stick as serious as a scholar. A little girl trails him with a basket that wobbles like a small boat and contains, as far as you can tell, 3 turnips and a philosophy of fairness. She informs the world, at volume, that the turnips are equal. The world, for once, seems willing to agree. The second part of the morning is contract work. Your body signed years ago. You take the scythe from its sleep and set its angle with the attention you would give a baby's head. A good scythe swing is half geometry, half courtesy. You don't force it, you invite it to be correct. The grass answers by leaning and then falling with a sound like respectful applause. Each swath is satisfaction you can measure with your eye and your breath. You pause occasionally to kiss the blade with the whetstone's cool tongue, a whisper of sharpness that is also a spell against accidents. The blade approves with a thin, bright sound. You keep your fingers well clear because you prefer them attached. When a tool is faithful, it makes you faithful to it. You wipe the blade clean, you oil it against weather's meddling, you store it on pegs out of the reach of curious hands. In a world that confuses ownership with permission, stewardship is your secret ambition. You cannot own weather, you cannot own the Lord's good opinion, but you can keep a scythe true, and that feels like a small corner of the world where fairness is possible. News travels in the village without needing paper. You hear from the scythe swing away that old Jahan's cow has calved late and lively, that the Reeves' brother arrived from the next parish with a tale about a swirling light in the north sky, that someone's aunt saw a fox near the henhouse and is considering theology. All stories have flour in them, even the ones about stars. You promise to help Jahan fetch an herb the midwife says is good for milk and to set a trap near your own coop with more hope than confidence. The fox, after all, is a professional. Toward noon, work moves into its true middle. This is the part of the day that does not ask for drama. It asks for pacing. Your mind smooths itself into the repeating pattern: swing, step, breathe, lift, carry, set, look, judge, adjust. You discover again that boredom is a luxury afforded by softer lives. In yours, monotony is really a string of small choices, each one deciding whether the winter will be thin or merely modest. Even when the task is the same, the day is not. The ground tells you if a mole has been foolish. The sky gives you its letter by letter. Your shoulders, that reliable team of oxen with names you never speak aloud, keep pulling. Today, you owe a slice of hours to the manor. The domain wants a ditch widened and a fence mended where last month's wind talked too loudly. You join the others in the yard as the Reeve reads the work list in the crisp voice of a man whose grandfather also read lists. The manor house lifts its stone face like a bored saint. It has seen this before and will again. The great barn smells of grain and the warm dust of last year's sunlight. The steward marks names as if names were sacks he could stack. You get a dull spade, make it less dull with the whetstone, and follow the line of men toward the ditch that needs convincing. There is a kind of fellowship in collective difficulty. The ditch is a muddy persuasion that insists on being both deeper and useful. You slice the bank, lift the spoil, throw it with as little waste as you can contrive. A friend makes a tidy joke about water choosing its own road. You pretend it's not funny, so he can tell it again in winter when jokes are rationed. A boy too young for full duty stands nearby passing pegs for fence rails, proud of an employment paid in nods. In half an hour your boots hold the weight of wet earth as if they have joined a new guild, the worshipful company of clods. By afternoon the fence's argument with the wind is over for now. You scrub the spade in a puddle and rub the handle with your palm until it squeaks, a sound that proves clean the way a bell proves noon, and carry it back to the rake-leaning corner where tools live in silhouette. Sometimes you think the manor keeps tools like a choir keeps hymns. They all look alike until you are asked to sing one. The steward's chalk travels your name with economy. A tithe of your strength becomes a mark on a tally and then dissolves into the account book you will never see. This is not cruelty, it is arithmetic. Arithmetic has a talent for turning human backs into columns. On the way home, you pause at the mill because time is a coin that must be exchanged whether you approve or not. The miller is powdered like an angel who has chosen ditch work as a hobby. His smile is half calculation, half bread. The wheel turns with the mill race's confident shouldering, water doing what it has always done when given a gentle fall and a reason. Inside, the air is thick with the idea of flour. You breathe and imagine your lungs thinking in porridge. You hand over grain and receive back flour minus the miller's customary bite, fair by the custom of this place and unfair by any calculus invented later with more comfortable chairs. The stones give out their agreeable growl and you stand watching for a moment, hypnotized by the reliable marriage of gravity and craftsmanship. On a beam above the hopper, a cat sleeps in more depth than flour. A step away from the mill is the bake oven, not yours. No private ovens here by right of the Lord's due, but a shared belly of heat ruled by the baker's wise hands. The oven is open today, steam saying polite hellos as loaves go in and become a better version of themselves. You queue with your dough and your small fee. The baker's arms are a sermon in the benefits of repetition. He gestures you forward, nods at your scoring, and promises a time for collection that you accept as if it were a blessing, because it is. In villages where kitchens are small and fuel expensive, a communal oven is both economy and neighborliness. The bread you will take home later will carry not only your hearth smoke, but a hint of the whole village's hunger turned into patience. By now the light is taking off its brightness like a shawl at a threshold. You know you have a last round of chores to finish while seeing is still free. The path home remembers your boots. Its bumps are autobiographical. In the yard you pause to check the thatch, more habit than need, but also a form of conversation with weather. The thatch answers with its dry silence. A good thatch is like a sensible hat. You forget it until the day you do not, and then you do not forget it with energy. Inside, the cottage has been thinking about supper. A pot hangs from the iron crook. It does not pretend to be extravagant. Barley and beans are reliable, onions a kindness, a shred of bacon a holiday, even when no saint has demanded it. The steam writes its brief letter to the rafters, adding a wet line to the smoke lines that are generations thick and honest about the house's memory. A child toddles past with the solemnity of a monk tasked with carrying a very important spoon. Another child coughs once and then remembers to grow. The cat surveys everything with the superior intelligence of someone who has never paid a tithe. You sit on the stool that has your day impressed in it and take up the bone needle for a strap that split when yesterday's basket asked to be heavier than it should. Stitching is its own theology. Enter, cross, emerge, tie off. You lay the mended strap over a peg to remember tomorrow. The spindle and distaff wait for the in-between minutes, waiting minutes never being idle here. The distaff tucks under your arm like a well-behaved branch. The spindle spins the day into a thread with the soft hum that is the village's unofficial lullaby. You could spin walking to the field, spin at the bake oven queue, spin while listening to your neighbor's weather prophecy. Wool becomes yarn, the way hope becomes plans, by being pulled steadily through the small space between what is and what could be. The door opens to admit your partner in the evening. Two entities with overlapping weather. He smells of earth and effort. You pass him a bowl, He passes you a look that means the fence lived, the ditch obeyed, the steward's chalk was merciful. A small miracle. The stew tastes like negotiations successfully concluded. You eat slowly enough for gratitude, but quickly enough for sense. The children make a cathedral of crumbs under the bench. Someone hums the beginning of a tune, and someone else finishes it, not because they mean to harmonize, but because the tune knows the way. After supper, the village arranges itself into little constellations. Some go to the alehouse, where a bench and a cup mean hearing the news without buying a goose. Some lean in doorways, discussing the fragility of roofs and the arrogance of crows. You walk to the church porch with a bundle of kindling to tithe this week, or perhaps a handful of apples from the tree that thinks more of generosity than of personal advancement. The porch smells of old blessings and damp. In the dim light, a notice is posted in a clerk's excellent hand about the next court day, when hedges and pigs will be asked to justify themselves. A neighbor asks if your rye has forgiven last winter. You say rye remembers differently than people. This passes for philosophy and is not wrong. On the way back, the sky is thinking about stars. One by one they agree to be seen, as if the night has negotiated a fair wage for their time. Your breath feels bigger now that the air has cooled, the same lungs suddenly owning more room, as if someone opened a window you couldn't see. The path is fine for feet that know it. For strangers, it would be a sentence with too many commas. A fox coughs its dry bark near the hedge, and the hens, drowsy in their wooden democracy, rustle in their sleep, but do not panic. You honor the fox as a professional you hope not to hire. Tomorrow you will check the coop latch with the solemnity of a notary. Inside again, the door bar slides into its brackets with the satisfying sound of safety choosing you tonight. The hearth performs its evening magic. Small sticks become heat, heat becomes companionship, and companionship becomes stories with the polite edges worn from frequent telling. Someone remembers the winter when flour arrived late but laughter arrived early. Someone remembers the spring when the bees relocated without informing their landlord. Someone remembers a dream with a white stag who told a joke about turnips. The children knit themselves into sleep as if pulled along by a friendly current. Work still has its foot in the door. There are tools to smooth and store, blades to oil, the day's mud to scrape from boot soles and leave as a souvenir near the threshold. You hold the scythe in the door's mouse-hole light and run the whetstone along its length, short tidy strokes that sound like secrets kept well. Sparks remain theoretical. You are careful. The blade is now a fine drawn line again, a modest miracle you would show off to someone who collects miracles if such a person ever knocked. You hang it on its pegs and feel a small, unjustified pride, the best kind, because it came free. Night is not a solid block in this place. It is 2 slices with butter in between. You will sleep now, wake in the dark to tend the banked fire, and sleep again until the rooster writes his loud opinions on the dawn. The bed is not a bed in the modern, princely sense. It is a platform of rough boards, ropes tightened by a peg, and a straw mattress that smells faintly of last summer's sun, cured into comfort. Over it, a woolen coverlet heavy enough to talk back to cold. Beside it, a little box where you keep the knife that cuts bread and trouble, the bone needle that closes problems, the bit of ribbon your mother's mother once called lucky. You take the first sleep gratefully, because the day has taken your measure and found you suitable. Muscles unwind like rope soaking in warm water. Your thoughts slow from plow pace to spindle pace to the pace of the cat reviewing the room. Dreams arrive like polite visitors, staying just long enough to be remembered kindly. When you wake in the middle, the cottage is the inside of a seashell, curved, soft-sounding, faintly lit by the rush's calm flame. You stir the embers, add a small billet of wood you split 2 days ago with the good wedge, and the fire takes it as if you offered a gift perfectly chosen. Sometimes in this middle, you step outside and let the cold measure you. The stars are hammered silver, if silver were far and unbending, and the lane a pale grammar that grammar never taught you. You empty a slop pail into the privacy where slop pails go, Glance at the sky's indifferent kindness and feel your feet eager to return to the specific warmth that has your name on it. Back under the coverlet, you listen to the home's honest symphony. A beam settling with a dignified tick, a ember whispering. A child sighing the sigh of someone who has discovered sleep is a friend with a good sense of timing. If illness passes through the parish, it does so like weather, with a direction but not a schedule. Tonight, everyone breathes in a way that makes you believe tomorrow is probable. You say a brief prayer without theologizing it, more a thanks to the practical saints of dry socks, tight thatch, and blades that choose not to betray. Faith here is a tool too. You use it the way you use the yoke and the rake, not to impress anyone, but because carrying is easier with it. You do a mental count, the accountant of ordinary courage. Bread enough, yes. Ale, some. Salt, low. Must ask at the next fair, and take a skein or two of yarn to barter if the weaver's wife is feeling forthcoming. Eggs will help if the hens forgive the fox's rumors. Beans doing well? Thank the law of legumes and the stubbornness of the soil. The oxen's yoke strap is solid. You oiled it on St. Martin's Eve as custom and sense require. The child's shoes will need a patch before the frost decides to be more articulate. You set these figures down in the invisible ledger of your mind, a book as real as any in the manor chest and easier to balance because you will not allow yourself to lie in it. The second sleep comes as if poured, finding every hollow the day left and filling it level. This sleep is not just rest, it is storage. Your body takes what it needs and tucks away a small remainder, because tomorrow the path will not be smoother, only more familiar. In dreams, the oxen speak in the human tongue, but say only what they always say: forward, forward, forward. The field is a friend with a straight face. The bailiff shrinks to the size of a doll and claps his chalk hands silently. You wake with the tiniest smile, surprised that even your dreams respect accuracy. You do not know history will call your life medieval. You only know day and next day, sowing and harvest, heat and cold, obligation and help, the ledger that can be shrugged off only by sleeping. Perhaps, decades from now, someone with ink on their fingers will write about kings who never broke a clod, battles that trembled banners, but not barley. They will not write your name. That is all right. The bread remembers you. The fence remembers you. The roof remembers you every time the rain tries to walk in as if it were family. Memory is not only in books, it is also in ropes that do not snap, in handles polished to the perfect kindness by a particular palm, in a stone that has kept the shape of your resting. And so morning returns, punctual as the bell, grayer first, then thinking about gold. The cock announces fresh opinions, undeterred by the fact that yesterday heard them already. You rise again into your sturdy alphabet: water, fire, bread, field, tool, neighbor, and the sentences you write with that alphabet are not flashy, but legible. Even the bailiff could read them. You will not chase grandeur, you will chase a chicken. You will not govern a county, you will govern a stew. And yet, if courage has a plain name, it is this: to lift the yoke, to steady the plow, to balance the pail, to close the door, and to return at last to the straw that remembers you exactly and keeps the quiet ledger of your sleep. Once more the horn window lifts a careful light. Once more the hearth gives a patient yes. Once more your boots find the path, and the path pretends to be surprised. And at the day's end, when the thatch whispers its endorsement and the pot turns hunger into patience, you will lower the latch and know that the greatest luxury of all has been granted: to be ordinary again, to be necessary again, to lie down again on the straw that held you this morning and will hold you tomorrow, faithful as any saint, quiet as any blessing, honest as earth. Imagine trying to budget with a handful of beans, a stubborn rooster, and a cloud that may or may not be thinking about rain. That is the village economy most years, precise in its rituals, imprecise in its outcomes, a loom that asks you to weave with thread, that might vanish if the wind remembers an errand. Your hands know how to count in the currency of tasks. Your pockets, if you had them, would know how to count in crumbs. Begin at the beginning, which is grain. Grain is more than food. Grain is a calendar you can chew. In spring, it is a prayer. In summer, a conversation with weather. In harvest, a negotiation with your own back. Through winter, it is the quiet arithmetic in a wooden chest that decides whether the house is confident or merely brave. Wheat is ambition in many places. Barley is comfort. Rye is caution. Oats are the good friend who doesn't dress up, but always shows. Beans keep you honest and keep the soil interested, returning a little of what was taken, like a neighbor who insists on bringing a dish even when you said don't bother. The grain leaves your field and enters a world governed by dues that feel like village laws of gravity. Some of these dues belong to the Lord, days of service on the domain, those chalk-marked hours that turn muscle into ledger. Some belong to the church, a tenth of what you harvest, in theory and often in practice, paid in sheaves or in coins that have been cut into fractions so small you could use them to weigh feathers. Some belong to monopolies of place, the mill to grind, the oven to bake, sometimes the press to make cider or oil where those fruits grow kindly. You do not take your wheat to a hand quern by the fire unless necessity invites secrecy, because the Lord's stones are supposed to have first say, and the bake oven the last word. It is not that you cannot do it at home, it is that the village, in many regions, has decided you should not. The miller's toll is flour as a tax, visible as a scoop. The oven's fee is heat as a service, measured in coins or handfuls of dough. The church's tithe is gratitude manifested in small heaps of wheat, or in coins that smell faintly of everyone who touched them before you. The Lord's rent is often paid in work, and sometimes in money you are still teaching your palms how to hold. And the market asks for eggs or yarn or a chicken that really had other plans. Every year, a portion of your strength is translated into other people's certainty. Some days that feels like charity you are not sure you intended to give. Other days, it feels like belonging with conditions. The weights and measures are a theater all their own. The bushel used at home is a trustworthy old friend. You know its bottom and its mood. The bushel used at the manor granary is a little more official, which is to say it is a little more optimistic about how much your grain can be encouraged to become. A measure with high shoulders can tuck in more than a flat measure. A measure shaken once for fairness may be shaken twice for duty. The balance scale in the mill room hangs from a beam with dignified patience. The iron weights, each stamped with a mark you do not own, sit on a shelf like small heavy mayors. The counterweight pans are polished by coins, flour dust, and the hope of exactness. There are arguments here, but they usually sound like polite coughing and end with the miller adding a pinch back to your sack the way a host adds an extra spoon of stew. The pinch is small, the performance is large. Everyone goes home able to say the day was fair enough. If your house is the hinge of your life, then the bread chest is the pin that lets it swing. It is a solid wooden coffer with a lid that smells of smoke, clean cloth, and last week's patience. When it is full, you walk differently. The floorboards become tenderly grateful. When it is half full, you do more mental arithmetic during church. When it is nearly empty, all the saints have your attention and your spoon becomes a negotiator. Inside the chest, loaves crowd shoulder to shoulder like polite townsfolk at a market, and for a day or two after baking they give off a lavish scent that makes even the cat look pious. By day 4, the crust has decided to be philosophical. By day 6, the loaf is a firm lecture, which is fine because you know how to listen with a knife and a bowl. Bread that is past its cheerful prime becomes pottage with barley and onions, and a hint of bacon, if luck remembered your address. Nothing is wasted. Even the dryness is work to be done. You soften it with ale. You soften it with broth. You soften it with gratitude. Speaking of ale, ale is a humble accountant. It takes grain that could have been bread and makes it into a drink that remembers summer with a responsible memory. It is safer than raw water when the brook has been in conversation with upstream animals, and it turns a workday into something less jagged at the edges. Brewing at home happens when the calendar and the barley agree. You'll mash in when the hearth can be spared, boil the wort until the cottage smells like a barley festival, strain through a draped cloth or a basket that has seen other adventures. Pitch your yeast and hope its curiosity is strong. The ale you serve is light and practical. It also serves as currency in kind. A neighbor mends your gate. You send them away with a jug. The reeve asks after your health. You keep his question company with a cup. The alehouse, when you have a few pennies that actually want to leave you, is village news in liquid form. On those benches, the price of a drink comes wrapped around price announcements and rumors, and a joke that has been told so often it has become a hymn. The ale taster appointed by custom or court will show up now and then with a very serious expression and a wooden measure, making sure your brew is strong enough to be honest and honest enough not to cause an incident. This is all very official and, to be fair, occasionally helpful. You learn to smile with your eyebrows. Coins live in your world like migrating birds. They arrive in certain seasons, rarely in flocks, and you are surprised each time your hand closes on one. A silver penny is a generous presence, and many pennies are trimmed and split and thought into halves and quarters because life is made of small things. If coinage is scarce, you pay in kind and in labor. You barter a morning of scything for a length of cloth. You promise 2 carts of manure for a sheaf of thatch reeds. You bring the midwife eggs and cheese because your thanks deserves weight. Fairs and market days are the village's high tide, when goods flood the lanes and coin flickers like fish in brief sunlight. You bring a skein of yarn wound tidily on a reel, a basket of apples that look particularly confident, a hen that has been practicing her travel attitude. In exchange, you look for salt that doesn't lie about being dry, a small knife with an honest edge, a length of linen whose weave does not blush when you squint at it. A distant tinker repairs your pot with a patch that gleams like the moon in daylight. You pay him with a mixture of coin and proverb, and a promise about a goose someday, if the stars are agreeable. On manor court days, economy puts on a cloak and speaks in official words. The court is held under a tree or in a hall, depending on the lord's architecture and the weather's personality. The steward sits with a roll of parchment that looks longer than it has any right to be, and a clerk chews his pen like someone considering a serious romance with ink. The reeve stands off to one side, the bailiff to the other. Neighbors gather with faces composed into the shape that says they are sensible and not prone to untoward hedging. The court calls out cases. Who owes what? Who fenced where they ought not? Whose pig took an interest in a cabbage patch with reckless optimism? Who cut wood where the village says wood prefers to stay uncut? Fines are assessed, not as cruelty, but as the village's way of nudging each other toward the center line. Dues and duties are recited with the same intonation used for prayers. You stand when your name is called, acknowledge the labor days you have done and the days you will do. Accept the oven fee, nod at the assize that says bread should weigh what it says it weighs, and ale should not be too watery or too dangerous. The court is serious because winter is serious. It is also a social event because humans are invariably social, even in lines. Risk attends all of this like a medieval weather report. The crop may fail. Not dramatically, we will say gently, but just enough to lean the year's arithmetic toward worry. Rain can forget how to stop. Sun can decide to be ornamental. Wind can lie down and let mildew do the talking. Mice can discover that your straw-lined pit is the finest restaurant for miles. And weevils can hatch a tiny, determined project without so much as a by your leave. You build against risk in many small ways. Careful sowing with seed kept dry in bags that your grandmother aired on impeccable days. Gleaning after harvest with neighbors moving through stubble like respectful birds. Gathering what the sheaves forgot. Hedging your own little gamble with beans and peas because legumes are the quiet bankers of the soil. The Lord may reduce some dues in bad years, Neighbors murmur stories of such mercy in some parishes, and the church may make charity a little more charitable, handing out loaves that smell like grace. But the core of your safety is community, the quiet arrangement that says if your roof fails, 3 men will climb your ladder. If your pig falls sick, the woman who knows herbs will kneel in the straw with you. If your bread chest is more echo than loaf, you will not sit alone with the echo. There is a metaphysics to storage. Grain kept as sheaves in a small loft under your thatch is convenient but lively. Rats consider it part of the property. Grain threshed with flail on a winter's floor is satisfying work that also warms you, provided you do not think too hard about the chaff attaching itself to every surface you own. Grain stored in a chest with an iron hasp feels secure, yet you know the lock is really a lock against accidents and optimism, not against need. You hang a sprig of something blessed on the chest handle during certain feast days. You may not believe the sprig changes the behavior of rodents. You do believe it changes the behavior of your own heart, which is often enough. Taxes in kind have a voice. You can hear them when you hoist a sack that is going to the Lord's granary. The sack makes an argument about gravity and duty that your spine has heard before. You tie it with a rope that has witnessed more petitions than the manor gate. At delivery, a granary keeper in a cap that looks wise checks the load, hesitates as if deciding whether to enforce a secret law, then nods, opens the big door, and lets your season slide into a space that smells like the community's future. At the bake oven, your dough waits its turn, covered with a cloth that could be a little cleaner, but has served you since your second child arrived, and your patience halved then doubled in the same week. The oven belly roars lightly. The baker's paddle becomes an arm longer than your hopes. When you pick up your loaves later, your initials pricked in until you and they learned each other, you stand for a moment with them cooling in your arms, a stack of edible decisions. You cannot help it, you feel tall. Not every rent is in labor or grain. Some are in permissions that look like freedoms until you examine them from the side. You may have rights to common pasture, for cows who understand the language of grass, for sheep who understand the language of burrs. You may have a right to gather wood for fuel, though the village and the Lord and the shape of the hedge collaborate to say just how large a stick may declare itself dead and still be honestly gathered. You may have pannage days when your pig can go into the woods and become a scholar of acorns. In those days your pig will return with opinions and a renewed respect for fences. Each rite has a season, and each season has a clerk. Even the bees seem to know when law and flowers arrive at their handshake. Then there is sickness, not the dramatic kind that history likes to tell loudly, but the ordinary fevers that loosen grip strength and make simple mathematics difficult. A cough can reduce the plow team to 1.5 people. A child's rash can get into the week's plans and rearrange them without pausing to apologize. A sprained wrist makes a single egg feel like a chicken in heavy armor. These too are economic facts, measured in tasks not done and tasks done slower. The village has a policy for this, a quiet one. A basket is left. An hour of mending is lent. A rope is spliced. A gate is lifted onto its hinges by hands that say nothing about charity because they prefer accuracy. This is maintenance on the village as an organism. You will do the same when the ledger tips the other way. On market day, the village's private mathematics meet the wider world's algebra. You walk behind your barrow or balance your basket and step into a square where colors have opinions and smells have arguments. Spices sit in little flats like the idea of distant lands pretending to be domestic. Cloth hangs in strips, promising that sleeves could be more becoming if only your purse would agree. A man with a tray of pins becomes briefly the most important person you have ever met because your cloak pin has been holding on through faith and friction. You sell your eggs with the mild dignity of someone who invited hens to collaborate and was not disappointed. You choose a small jar of salt because food without it tastes like a plan, without follow-through. A friar passes with a smile and a story and a purse that remains light. A minstrel sings in a key that hopes the weather is paying attention. You go home with a small coin or two, a notion about how the neighboring parish is doing, and a new respect for your own bed. Sometimes the Lord calls for an aid, an extra contribution when a daughter marries or a son is knighted or some large event requires smaller coins to become a heap. You feel these requests in your bones before you hear them in words, the way a barometer would feel if it had sore knees. The village gathers the aid like picking the field a second time. Carefully, carefully, everything counts. The steward writes it all down, numbers drawn like thin ladders he climbs with his pen. If you are paid in remissions of duty later, you will chalk it up to the balance that always tries to become fairness. If you are not, you adjust because adjustment remains your chief profession. In all of this there is also pleasure, frugal and deliberate, but real. A well-fed fire is a wage. A piece of cheese saved for evening can act exactly like a festival for 20 minutes. New shoes for a child make the lane applaud. A comb that slides properly through washed hair turns a morning into a ceremony. A bowl without a crack feels like a speech on the topic of stability. A cat catching a mouse is a dividend. A loaf that rises higher than last week's loaf puts its hand on your shoulder and says kindly that you are doing it right. And a Sunday, when you have permission to put your tools to sleep and you're back in the same position for a luxurious 15 minutes, is a luxurious 15 minutes. How do you keep the numbers when paper is for other people? With tallies you can hold. A split hazel stick with notches, kept by you, and a matching partner kept by whoever waits for payment. When the pieces are reunited, notch to notch, the truth is visible to touch. With pebbles moved from one bowl to another as a week proceeds, the small kind of abacus that leaves no ink but trains attention. With a piece of blackened wood on a clean doorpost, wiping away the marks when you need to clear the worry. With songs and proverbs that remember ratios, a measure for the miller, a measure for the oven, 2 for the chest, and a handful for the saints, because it is wise to keep on good terms with both ovens and angels. Perhaps most invisible and most important, you learn to read the faces of things that do not have faces. The sky at 4 in the morning, which can tell you if it will be a good day to cut or a good day to carry. The edge of a blade, which can tell you whether it will help or hinder the next hour. The feel of the soil 2 inches down, cold speaking through your knuckles of whether seeds will interpret your optimism as expertise. The sound a loaf makes when you thump it, a hollow echo that tells you it has finished becoming itself. The look of a neighbor's mouth when he asks, "How goes it?" where the answer matters more than the grammar. Do you resent it? This system that is part family and part harness? Not precisely. You recognize that the village is the ship and the rents and dues are the ropes, and you are, many days, content to pull because you like the destination called winter with food. You resent bad weather occasionally, which is like resenting a cat for sitting where it pleases. You resent your own bad luck in a theatrical way, understood by all and forgiven by bedtime. You resent the miller on days when his smile leans too far into calculation, and you resent the steward on days when his chalk is enthusiastic. But you also lean on the miller when your grind must be finished before sundown, and you depend on the steward to remember your week with accuracy you will benefit from later. Resentment here is a spice. It is used sparingly, lest the stew be spoiled. There is risk that comes from beyond the field's edge, a war along some distant road that may never send a soldier to your lane but will certainly send a rumor, a king's tax imposed with very fine handwriting, a sickness in the sheep that asks wool to be both warmer and thinner. You cushion these with the only pillow you own, industry woven with fellowship. You cannot amend the king's ledgers, but you can keep yours clean. You cannot tell the sheep to resist invisible fleas, but you can warp the loom with patience and coax thread into cloth thick enough to argue with January. You cannot stop stories from galloping down the road, but you can decide which ones may enter your door. When night comes, the day's arithmetic settles into story form. Someone says aloud what the bread weighed today as if describing a friend's mood. Someone else reports that the mill race had more voice than usual and therefore must have been well fed by the brook up on the common. A child reviews the fairness of turnips again, unconvinced by the market's opinion but increasingly expert in debate. The cat settles on the chest and pretends to be a moral. Store what you can, where you can, with weight. You stack your loaves in the chest and they make a sound like confidence. You close the lid and smooth the cloth on top as if smoothing a crumpled map. Before sleep, you do the quiet round of checks that make you, in your own way, a steward. The door bar set, the banked coals blinking under ash, the pot rinsed, the blade oiled, the spindle on the shelf where the children's hands do not graze it in their adventure of being alive. You count in your head without moving your lips, 2 loaves high and 1 cut, 3 measures of barley, a cheese that will be ready next feast day if nobody gets impatient, eggs dependable again, salt low, candle in sufficient to get through the dark's impatience. You do not fear tomorrow precisely. You simply do not trust it without supervision. Supervision is what your hands are for. If the steward called today and the court sat, if the millstones turned and the oven glowed and the market rang with voices, the village has performed its economy with the dignity it prefers. You are part of the machinery and also the oil. The day's exchanges, bread for coin, grain for flour, labor for duty reduced, jokes for worry, compose a ledger written not merely in ink, but in ease. Ease is rare, and so you treasure its small arrivals. A spoon that feels heavier because it is feeding gratitude, a cloak that smells of smoke and not of rain, a moment at the threshold when the sky is turning from iron to velvet, and you like both, because both are honest. And so, as you lay down, you think of the bright little world of measures and dues. You think of the balance scale and how it tried to be just in a just enough sort of way. You think of the tithe heap in the church barn, a neat hill with saints' handwriting on it. You think of the miller's dusty grin, the baker's long-armed paddle, the steward's chalk that turned your day into 3 crisp strokes. You think of your own bread chest, the wooden heart of your house, and the way its emptiness is louder than any sermon. Tonight, it is not empty. It is not full either. It is adequate, which is a cousin of grace. You touch the lid with 2 fingers the way you would greet a neighbor you like and trust. Then you turn toward the straw and the banked red of the hearth, and you let sleep step in, balancing the column of your breath. Tomorrow there will be more counting. Tomorrow there will be measuring with bushels and with kindness. Tomorrow there will be an oven fee that feels like a sigh and a loaf that feels like a victory. And when the day is over, the chest will speak again, softly, of what the village's tight economy could spare and what it kindly held. If the field is the stage where your strength performs, the cottage is the dressing room where you gather yourself between acts. It is not grand, this room of wood and earth, but it knows your name the way a pocket knows a coin. Step inside and the world tightens to a gentler scale, a clay floor that remembers every heel, smoke-soft rafters stitched with spider silk, a hearth that keeps a red opinion of warmth even when the wind rehearses its big speech outside. Here, shelter is not a thing you own. It is something you keep fed, like a small, amiable animal that rewards attention with comfort. The walls are an honest technology, wattle and daub. You can feel the knowledge in your palms if you press lightly. Between upright stakes, you wove hazel rods until they held each other like friends in a story. Then you buttered the lattice with a mixture that would not impress a court, but thoroughly impresses weather. Clay, straw, maybe a little chopped rush, and yes, dung, the alchemy of ordinary life. When it dries, it becomes a kind of polite stone, not unbreakable but persuasive. On a sunlit day after a storm, that surface is warm to the touch where the fire has taught it a daily lesson. In a frost, it feels close to the outdoors, just farther back in line. The roof is thatch, thoughtfully layered reeds that learn to say no to rain in a dozen dialects. A good thatch, well combed and pinned with hazel spars, is as much a brag as anyone here allows. You can see the thatcher's neat habits in every angled wedge. He treads there with ropes slung around his waist and a legget in his hand, tapping each bundle until it agrees to lie still and behave like a roof. In a high wind, the thatch hums. It sounds like 1,000 tiny brushes painting the weather away. Doorways say a great deal about a house's confidence. Yours has a wooden bar that slides into sockets at night with a grown-up thunk and a latch string for the daylight hours, when neighbors are expected and foxes are not. The door itself is plank, modestly swollen by rain, with a polite habit of sticking when it wants more attention. You have mended the threshold with a sliver of oak so the bottom won't scuff itself into a draft. As for windows, glass is a luxury most villages wear only to church. Here, the window is a horn pane or a oiled cloth, letting in a softened idea of light. In summer, the shutter stands open and the house inhales. In winter, the shutter is a loyal shield and the house hums quietly to itself, warm-breathed and smoky-scented. The floor, a tamped clay with scattered rushes, is a record and a comfort. In the morning, you smooth the rushes with a broom of birch twigs, the same way you smooth your hair, presentable enough for the day. The rushes have a scent of field and river and a little of last night's stew. They cushion barefoot steps and are easily refreshed when the season turns. You spread fresh marsh grass on Sundays, if fortune allows, and feel the cottage lift its chin at the change. Even the cat approves, which is rarer than people think, and much more expensive in other currencies. Heat is the cottage's chief work, a discipline that requires a teacher and a student. Your hearth is both. The clay and stone fireback absorbs the day's effort and gives it back at a civil pace. Above, the smoke finds its old root. Not every hearth has a grand chimney. Many have a vent or the open trust of a Louvre. Smoke travels the beams and leaves a varnish that remembers every winter you have survived. The rafters wear that memory like jewelry, shiny in places, dark in others, a kind of domestic night sky. Clothes hung there dry with a patience that becomes wisdom. On cold evenings, when you climb the ladder to fetch something from the loft, you pass through layers of smell, the honest bouquet of barley, wood smoke, wool, and a hint of cow that refuses to apologize, and think with some pride that you live inside a fabric of your own making. A house is also a set of objects that understand their jobs. Pegs along the wall hold everything that needs to be safely off the floor. Cloaks that keep weather from arguing with your bones. Bags of grain that refuse to fraternize with mice. A small iron pot your grandfather bought when iron felt extravagant. The chest at the foot of the bed smells of cedar and cloth. It hoards linen like a dragon hoards gold, only more practical. The table is a plank on trestles, faithful because it can become anything. A kneading board, a surgery for boots, a navvy's office for planning a fence. Stools make a democracy of sitting. The great bench against the wall is a minor miracle. More storage under, a place to nap over, a brave back when you lean to stitch. What about water? It is always first. It is always last. It is always a distance measured in shoulders. You keep a large earthen jar near the hearth for the cooking and a wooden bucket on the peg for washing. In winter, water prefers to be solid if left unattended. You negotiate. Morning begins with warming a basin of it so faces can remember they are faces. Hands are washed often here, before meals, after animals, during brewing, more often than stories later will remember, because ordinary cleanliness lacks the drama history admires. Hair is combed out with a bone comb that could participate in a small architectural project if asked. You sometimes oil the comb with a whisper of goose fat to persuade tangles that democracy exists. Bathing is not daily. It is a ceremony. On market eve or feast eve, or on the day when your back declares itself a landscape in need of rain, you set the tub near the fire. Into it go bucket after bucket of heated water, and in go you, with sighs that could be sold as medicine if someone could package them. Children tumble in after. They think you did this for them and you let them keep the illusion because innocence sometimes counts as soap. There are places where a bathhouse keeps steam like a precious guest. You have heard rumors of hot stones and aromatic twigs. In your village, the bathhouse is your own cottage, repurposed briefly as a river that got lost and decided to stay. Clothes are protection and personality and the household's rolling savings account. Linen next to the skin, when you can manage it, is a small, daily miracle, cool and clean, a whisper that says, you are looked after. Wool over that is your contract with the winds of your parish. Thick in winter, lighter in summer, always honest, wool accepts your stories into its weave and gives you warmth in return. You learn the trick of felting socks, beating wool into an enthusiastic agreement, and you bless whoever first thought to keep ankles warm with something that doesn't pretend to be polite. Shoes are turn shoes, stitched inside out and flipped like a pancake when done, soft enough that your feet still hear the ground speak, but not so soft that every pebble insists on poetry. On muddy days, you strap on pattens, little wooden platforms that lift you just enough to keep the earth from considering your toes part of its jurisdiction. Nighttime turns clothes into bedding and bedding into a minor landscape. The straw tick on your bed is stuffed from last summer's gleaning. When it is new, it has the lofty air of a bed auditioning for nobility, a little crinkly, full of the field's faint sunlight. As the months go on, it learns your shape. You could find your place in the dark by touch alone. When the straw tires of being polite, you unlace the tick and exchange the contents for the fresh. The old straw goes to the pig or the garden, where it resumes a quieter usefulness. There are pests to discourage. We will speak softly of them, and more softly still of the powders and herbs you use. Wormwood, rue, a whisper of lavender stolen from a garden where aromatic optimism grows. A line of chalk, a strand of hair, a charm in a corner, practical, hopeful, and never fully proven, which suits the cottage because it understands both sides of belief. Sickness visits as weather does, uninvited, variable, and bearing its own logic. You do not read illness as a moral failure. You read it as a problem that has chosen to knock today. Fevers that linger, coughs that learn the rafters, aches that weigh the limbs like wet cloth. These arrive, stay, and leave, sometimes with a priest's blessing, sometimes with a healer's hand, sometimes with nothing more than broth and time. In seasons when a great sickness sweeps the roads with a larger broom, the village speaks low and lines up its care. Doors marked to remind the healthy, bread left on thresholds, prayers braided into the air. We will not dwell here, the bed is for rest. Instead, we'll linger where recovery is made. In the warm corner by the hearth, with a quilt that smells faintly of sheep and sun, with a cup of something comforting, and a voice reading the day's small news. You keep a shelf of simples because it is both thrift and love. Dried mint for stomachs that lost an argument, yarrow for a cut that wants persuasion, willow bark for heads convinced they are bells, plantain leaves for stings, elderflower for colds that think too much of themselves. A bundle of sage hangs from a beam like a modest chandelier. Honey sits in a pot like sunlight that forgot to leave, and onions serve as medicine as well as supper, their astringent honesty helping a chest to unknot itself. At night you make a posset, milk warmed with a little ale, a grate of nutmeg if the fare was generous, sweetened with a spoon of honey, and watch a child's cheeks recover their usual debate with freckles. The healer in your village is a woman with a basket that could carry a small library. She knows the hedgerows as a learned person knows books. In her company, leaves have surnames. She speaks kindly to nettles before plucking them, not because nettles require flattery, but because kindness is a tool that never breaks. When she comes through your door, she looks first at the patient and then at the room, because rooms are also patients. Is the fire cheerful? Is the air fresh? Is the bed near the wall where drafts gossip? She leaves with a pinch of payment, eggs, a skein of yarn, a loaf pricked with your initials, and a blessing that smells like rosemary. The priest approves, mostly, When he does not, he declines to argue explicitly with willow bark because headaches are ecumenical. You have seen a leech book, or at least you have seen someone see one. The clerk at church can read the complicated letters that turn remedies into recipes. Some are sensible, some are charms bound up with plants and prayers, some involve ingredients that never met a hedge in your parish. You keep to what you can harvest and what you can afford. Even prayers, you find, are improved by the addition of broth. A rosary can be counted with the same fingers that stir the pot. A comfort that asks only that you keep breathing is the best kind. Cleanliness, too, does more work than stories later will give it credit for. You boil linen when you can. Beat it on the wash stone in a rhythm everyone can hum. You change shifts more often than enemies of your century imagine. In summer, wash day turns the green by the brook into a gallery of white flags and family stories. Shirts flap like friendly geese. Children make boats of scrap wood and solemnly launch them with twigs for passengers, inventing currents, ships, and geography from 10 feet of stream. You lay socks on the hedge and the sun stitches warmth into them for later. There are places where a fuller's earth and soaps made of lye and fat teach wool a lesson in obedience. There are days when soap is simply the good sense of hot water and a rubbed leaf. You do both, as budget and time allow, and the cottage looks on, pleased to smell a little like wind. There is comfort in order. A shelf that is mostly neat feels like a sermon given succinctly. A spoon in its accustomed place can prevent a small crisis. The knife you keep sheathed on a peg is a friend. The whetstone a quiet doctrine. You sand wooden bowls with sedge or fine rush, and their smoothed surfaces accept bread each day as if each day were the first. The pot scours clean with a handful of ash and a spot of water. It glows like confidence. You repair, you mend, you patch. A patched thing is doubly yours. In a home where every object has a job, the patched object has two, its original purpose and the story of its survival. The stool with the neatly replaced leg becomes a piece of family history that also happens to be useful when someone needs to put on shoes. You would not call it meditation, but you have habits that steady you the way a hand on a horse's neck steadies both hand and horse. In the early morning, before the lane has made any announcements, you listen to the house. A beam ticks. The kettles sigh. The lark scribbles on the sky's margin. You breathe the warm yeast scent that means dough is remembering what it wanted to be. In that moment, the whole world is a hearth. Later, while spinning, the spindle's hum becomes a line you can follow through thought. What to sow where, which fence will sulk next storm, whether the hen with the expressive eyebrows is planning a mutiny. At night, before you bar the door, you look at the rushlight's small flame and count quietly to the age of the youngest child. It is not mathematics. It is gratitude with a rhythm. On some evenings, news arrives wearing weather's cloak. A neighbor's cough is louder. Another household's roof took a scolding from wind and needs a ladder. The smith's apprentice has a burn he says comes from enthusiasm. The black salve will be useful. A babe is expected in a fortnight. The midwife will begin sleeping lightly, and her bag will grow heavier with towels, twine, and determination. You adjust your plans in the way all plans here are designed to be adjusted. One chore traded for another, an extra loaf, a spare hour, a bed made up by the hearth with an extra blanket from the chest. Hospitality is the village's emergency plan. The seasons turn the cottage into different instruments. In spring, it is a basket for seedlings, a nursery for hope, a cloak thrown around the damp. In summer, it breathes with the door open and becomes a pavilion for work, churn going like a patient drum, cheeses draining in white rows like small moons, onions plaited into ropes the color of late afternoon. In autumn, it is a barn for a while, apples set in a cool corner, herbs bundled and swapped, a hen sometimes invited in for a day of dignity when the fox has been too chatty. In winter, the cottage is a ship. The door is the hatch, the rafters the rigging, the hearth the galley fire, and the walls keep out an ocean that keeps knocking to discuss its icy opinions. You sail the season together, house and you, until the lanes soften and the ash tree remembers leaves. There are darker hours. We will not deny them, only soften their edges with honest cloth. A fever that will not be negotiated. A winter that walks in wearing too little patience. A year when the barley decides it prefers to be discouraging. In such times the cottage holds what it can. Heat, quiet, hands. The church holds what it can. Prayers, bread, a list of names that are spoken aloud until someone is strong enough to answer back. The healer holds what she can. Tonics, whispered jokes, smells that remind a stubborn ear that the world is still fragrant. You hold what you can. The child's hand, the partner's shoulder, the spoon that keeps stirring. Sometimes victory is an evening with all foreheads cool and the door bar set. Sometimes it is a cough that goes from alarming to theatrical. Sometimes it is the simple fact that the cat complains about the weather. Complaints are proof of life. When storms come, you learn again how a small house can be brave. The thatch shivers and sheds water like a well-trained horse. The shutter thumps once the way a door thumps on a ship when the wave slaps it, then holds. The hearth draws steadily, flame behaving like a good guest. You put to rights anything that wants calming. Pots away, pegs checked, a quiet conversation with the ladder, and you settle on the bench with your mending and your listening. Outside, the wind debates ridiculous topics with the elm and loses. Inside, the kettle decides to sing alto. The children play a game with beans and a bowl that involves complicated rules and the inevitable argument about whether beans can jump. Nobody asks the beans. Food is medicine that doesn't say so out loud. Pottage that thickens to the spoon's idea of perfection. The heel of a cheese you rubbed with salt weeks ago and turned every day like a small clock. Leeks that store winter's green inside their layers as if keeping a secret for you. A bit of bacon that gladdens the pan with a sound that would sell out a theater. You do not apologize for eating the same good things in reassuringly similar ways. Variety exists in season and in company. The feast days carry their own colors. Saffron, if the purse allowed, a cake with spices that traveled farther than you will. But even on an ordinary Tuesday, supper is a ceremony in which everyone who labored at anything today receives a share of the result. Light is rationed but never miserly. Rush lights are made at the table, rush pith soaked in tallow, trimmed neatly, pushed into the old iron clip that has a manner like a schoolmaster. Tallow candles come out when company does, or when fine stitching asks to be done right, or when a child's fever recedes and you decide to stand watch with a kinder flame. In deepest winter, when the day pretends to be a short story, you extend it a little, not to conquer the dark, but to be gracious with it. The dark in turn is gracious back, giving you stars when the clouds part and a tube of velvet sky through the Louvre where smoke beckons them down to listen. There are jokes here, too, because jokes are a form of insulation. You tease the sow about her conversational tone when she has opinions at dawn. You mock, gently, the rooster's ideas about scheduling. You tell the children that the spider in the corner is the house clerk, keeping tally of flies. You inform the cat that he is the sheriff and should patrol more energetically. You remark to the fire that it owes you a song for all this fuel, and the kettle obliges because kettles are generous musicians. These jokes hold no malice. They are habits of lightness, and they help your back lift the next pail. Sometimes you dream of larger houses, timbered frames as articulate as bishops, glazed windows like held water, hearths that could roast a cow without having to apologize to the stew. Then morning comes, and your own small hearth has warmed the basin, and the bread has risen to the height of its talents, and your cloak smells of yesterday's sunshine, and you think, no one says this aloud but you think it, that size is a negotiable virtue. The cottage answers by being exactly big enough for your laughter and exactly small enough for your silence. Illness passes, as weather does. Recovery is a project carried out by everyone in shifts. The patient, who practices breathing and sipping. The household, which practices patience and soup. The healer, who rehearses wisdom. The saints, who attend without fuss. When strength returns, it arrives first in small ways. A step from hearth to door without a pause. A smile at a joke that isn't very good. A nap taken because it is a choice, not because it is a cliff. The first day a convalescent takes a turn on the bench with the spindle is a village holiday celebrated privately. The first night everyone sleeps through is a luxury that outranks spices. The cottage knows its limits and admits them. It cannot stop the rain. It cannot shift the seasons. It cannot keep sadness entirely outdoors. What it can do is meet you at the threshold and say, in the language of wood and fire and linen, that you are expected and that it has kept its promise to hold a space for your return. When you step into that space, your shoulders lower a degree, your breath remembers to be deep, and the day's sharp edges soften into shapes that cooperate. If history forgets your name, the bench will not, and the hearth certainly won't. They speak your name in creaks and crackles and a little settling sigh you could recognize in your sleep. On a spring afternoon when the air has manners, you throw open the shutter and let the room exhale. You beat a rug. The dust organizes itself into ambitious ideas and then surrenders. You shake the mattress and watch sunlight catch chaff like gold leaf. You scrub the table. The wood smiles. You lay fresh rushes and declare the floor reborn. The children race from the door to the chest and back, inventing a game where both endpoints are home. You hang shirts on the hedge and congratulate them on understanding wind. Then you sit on the step, case knife in hand, and whittle a peg because there is always a peg to be whittled. The pig studies you as if politics were at stake. The goose disapproves generally. The cat, having inventoried your lap for warmth and found it adequate, decides to sleep. When evening proposes itself, you consent. Supper finishes, bowls are rinsed, the ashes are settled. You check the bar, you touch the chest. You lay the poker across the hearth mouth the way your mother did, not because iron bars witches, but because iron bars embers with admirable efficiency. You set the rushlight in its holder, and the light makes a small kingdom in which the bed is a hill and the cupboard a forest. The children climb into their nests like sailors returning to hammocks, and the house begins to do its own slow breathing. You listen. The kettle stops complaining about being hot. The rafters remember the day to themselves. An owl takes attendance outside and everyone answers. When you lie down, the straw remembers your shape, and the blanket remembers who gets the edge and who gets the middle. Your back translates the day into a language only beds understand. Your hands release their tools one by one: the bucket, the spoon, the needle, the plow handle, the spindle. Each tool clatters softly onto the floorboards of sleep. You close your eyes, and the cottage remains awake enough to keep an ear out. It has been doing that since you first walked through its door, younger than you are now, carrying a bundle of linen and a head full of courage made from other people's examples. And if you wake in the reasonable middle of the night, as many do and many will, you add a billet and listen while the flame agrees to the bargain. You check the child by touch, the way mothers and fathers have done forever, a hand on a forehead as competent as any instrument. You drink a swallow of cool water from the jug. Perhaps you step out beneath the stars for a moment, to drop the house's quiet into a pocket of sky and take back a silence to plant in the corner by the stool. You return to the bed, and the bed takes you back without conditions. It was made for this. So were you. Shelter, sickness, small comforts. They braid into a life the way rushes braid into a floor. No one rush is a house. Together, they are a home. You will spend more hours inside these walls than anywhere else in the world, and the walls will not mind. The daub will crack here and there. You will patch it with a handful of straw and mud and a laugh. The thatch will grow old the way faces do, handsomer for having kept the weather at bay. The hearth will blacken its stones and earn their right to be called venerable. And you, sitting with your mending and your modest jokes, will become the shape the house was waiting to hold. So let the wind talk. Let the rain test. Let the year put its questions one after another. You have an answer, and it is not fancy. You put your hand on the warm bricks, you tuck the blanket under your heels, you brew a pot that smells like thyme and scents, you kiss the child's brow, you bar the door, and you trust the straw to keep your imprint until morning. By then, the horn window will have poured in a spoonful of dawn, and the hearth will lift its red eyebrows in greeting. You will rise, greet your tools, smile at the cat's familiar moralizing, and step into the day from a room that likes you. The cottage, generous conspirator that it is, will keep its quiet promise, and at the end of the next long constellation of chores, it will welcome you back as if you had been gone for years. The year is a wheel with teeth, and you ride it because everyone does. It turns you through mud and frost, blossom and sweat, smoke and song. There are kings with calendars and saints with feast days, but your true almanac is the soil under your fingernails and the sky's shifting grammar above your hat. Some mornings the wheel clicks forward politely. Other days it grips your sleeve and spins you sooner than you meant to go. Yet always, reliably, the year arrives in pieces you can name with your tongue and feel with your boots. Plow time, sowing, weeding, hay, harvest, gleaning, slaughter, mending, waiting, and the thin silver weeks when winter rehearses mercy. Begin in late winter, when the world still thinks in whites and browns, but the ash tree loosens its fists. The ground is cold but no longer sulking. Frost withdraws its opinions inch by inch. In the hedges, blackthorn offers blossoms like brave punctuation in a text still mostly blank. Rushes in your floor grow tired of being a carpet and would like to be a meadow again. Your breath smokes when you laugh, and you do laugh, because someone claims to have seen a swallow and immediately 3 people claim to have seen 2. You bring out the plow from its corner, beam rubbed with oil, coulter kissed by whetstone, share tightened by a nail that remembers your grandfather, and you look to the oxen who respond with their excellent philosophy. Forward exists, grass exists, we shall manage. Plowing is the first deep sentence of the year. The ridge and furrow field is a book you write with iron. You walk the line, hands on the handles, body remembering angles that stave off blisters and bad language. The earth opens, dark and moist, a respectable promise. Behind you, rooks hold a parliament, discussing the legal status of worms found during treaty negotiations. At the far hedge, snowdrops bow like courteous messengers, and your heart, practical as it is, tucks away a thin thread of delight. The village, seen from the edge of the field, looks like a tidy accident. Thatch stitched to sky, smoke making upright thoughts, people moving about their necessary business with the dignity of liturgy. Soon comes sowing, a ceremony both homely and holy. You knot on the sower's apron and lift the seed from the bag like a chorus leader asking the song to begin. Toss and step, a geometry that could teach the moon about orbits. Your hand learns the weight of barley versus wheat, the barley a touch more sociable, the wheat a touch more lordly, and listens to the wind's advice about direction. Even a stingy wind can be helpful if you flatter it. You trust your aim because your aim has been training alongside your patience since you were old enough to steal pea seeds and pretend they were jewels. Behind you, the field is combed into hope. Spring itself is a neighbor who borrows things and brings back more than she took. She borrows your time, your sore back, your last good pair of socks. She returns hedges in tiny greens, lambs with a talent for bouncing, and a choir of birds that keep impeccable hours. In the cottage, kids' boots leak mud that smells like sincerity. In the pasture, calves learn their legs, and you learn again that joy measured in hooves per minute is still joy. On saints' days, St. George with dragon gossip, St. Mark with weather opinions, the parish walks the bounds, beating the limits with willowy rods so that children and land remember each other. You tie a sprig of hawthorn into your cap and eat a piece of cheese that tastes like the kind of courage you can spread on bread. Weeding arrives as humbly as dust and doubles itself whenever you blink. You stoop in rows while larks write essays overhead, and your hands learn the difference between a polite volunteer and an invader with ambition. The hoe becomes an extension of your forearm and an improvement to your temper. Here, comedy is practical. You tease the chickweed for its optimism, you negotiate with the thistles, you commend the beans for being beans. In the shade of hedges you find violets and think of someone you love, because violets are memory's handwriting. The sun begins to argue more loudly with hats. You answer with a damp cloth and a cup of ale that thinks it's a sermon on moderation. By midsummer the lanes ring with hay bells, and the fields smell like warm applause. Haymaking is a festival disguised as heavy labor. You cut when the weather signs in triplicate. 3 bright days promised by clouds stacked neatly like folded shirts, and everyone moves, scythes swinging, rakes setting order to chaos, forks heaving gold into tidy heaps. Meadowsweet, clover, feathered grasses, they lay down in a sighing music your arms conduct. You turn the cut in the afternoon so the sun can read both sides. The whole village watches the western sky with the concentration of a gambler and the courtesy of a parish. If a storm approaches, you pitch the half-cured hay into cocks as quickly as prayer. If fair weather holds, you stack it on the wain and trot to the rickyard where skill becomes visible in angles and breath. A good rick sheds rain like a proud goose. A poor rick sulks and wastes. You have strong opinions about ricks. June and July are a laundry of blue sky pegged up with white. Bees behave as if the world were reasonable. The kitchen garden brags. Peas like strings of small moons. Cabbages as smug as aldermen. Onions in straight lines that could pass inspection at court. You dry herbs in shady corners while the air writes recipes you can follow by nose. Children collect snail shells and argue jurisprudence. The priest wipes his brow and keeps the book from sweating. The smith sings to his bellows in a private key. Nights become something you can sit in respectfully on a doorstep, counting bats in peace. Then harvest stands at the gate making the universal gesture for now. The wheat sizzles pale and rattly. The barley winks beardily. The oats behave like a crowd that has agreed on punctuality. You cut with sickles and reap hooks in a rhythm that stutters only when a field vole mistakes your foot for a hill. Sheaves are bound and stooked, little teepees of reliance, then carted to the yard, then built into stacks that turn the village outline into a short story about prosperity. The thresher's flail will have its hour later. Now the blade has the floor. Ale is half the wage and half the weatherproofing for moods. You keep your temper, not because you are a saint, but because angry hands cut slower. If the sun withdraws his favor and clouds prowl at the hedge, you move like people who have learned to outrun a sermon. When the loaded cart rocks through the lane and the ruts accept its weight with professional gravity, you feel tall without needing to stand on anything. Gleaners follow the reapers, widows, children, anyone whose livelihood knows margins better than centers. They move through stubble with dignity, collecting what the hands ahead missed and the breeze placed helpfully. The manor allows it as law and as mercy. The parish blesses it because justice is improved by being visible. Baskets fill with odds and ends that become breakfast, and there is a happiness to this quiet economy that never announces itself loudly. The field, even in its generosity, appreciates neatness. You move carefully. You thank what needs thanking in your heart, which knows the proper addresses. Between harvest and winter lies the brief golden republic of autumn. The days lean on your shoulder and whisper that you have done well enough to deserve apples. You pick them with a twist and a prayer for crispness, lay them on straw, and test them for personality by tapping their cheeks with a knuckle. Pears pretend to be delicate and then reveal steel in their cores. The hedges offer blackberries already wearing their own stains. You pluck them and forgive the bramble's editorial comments on your sleeves. Mushrooms arrange secret meetings in damp corners. You attend only those introductions vetted by elders with long memories. The pig, allowed into the woods for pannage, returns with the air of a philosopher and the mucky nose of a politician. Chestnuts tumble like polite applause. The children pounce. This is the time, too, for fairs and saints' days, for small pilgrimages undertaken in shoes that have opinions. You shoulder a pack of yarn and eggs and take the road marked by ditches and old stories. At the fair you see cloth so fine it almost sings, knives that gleam like opinions, spices in thimbled heaps that claim to hold the sun's accent. You buy salt weighed honestly and pins weighed generously against your rations of patience. You hear a ballad that combines a romance, a moral, and an agricultural report. You add your own verse in your heart. On a short pilgrimage to a shrine with a spring and a saint who once had a conversation with weather, you carry with you both hope and a crust of bread. The spring is cold. The hope is modest. Both are welcome. You come home with a badge of pewter, a sense that roads are wider than fields, and a keener love for your own door latch. But seasons are also editors who cut without asking. Some years the rain forgets to leave the conversation, and the wheat blurs into a green despair. Some years the sun sits on the hill doing nothing but being grand, and the springs recite poems about absence. Some years wind practices for greatness by unroofing your neighbor's shed and trying your thatch with skeptical fingers. You have plans for all three. For rain, you build ridges that lift roots above the sulk. You drain ditches. You pray not so much for dryness as for moderation, which is harder to obtain and more useful when it arrives. For drought, you mulch where you can and frown at the sky with the correct theological nuance. For wind, you trust to hedge and ditch and rope and the thatcher's art, and you put pebbles on the corners of things that are inclined to wander. Famine, when it walks, does not announce itself with trumpets. It trickles first, then runs. A bad harvest puts a thinner slice in the bread chest. A second bad harvest asks the chest to rehearse echo. Prices at market take up higher numbers and refuse to put them down. The miller's face lengthens even when he hides it. Ale tastes more of thrift than of festival. You cut the loaf more carefully, brew with more barley straw than barley. You glean more thoroughly, trade more quietly, and watch your neighbor's door for signs of trouble because your neighbor watches yours. The church's alms chest grows heavier with wood, lighter with coins. A loaf left on the porch of a house with a cough is a piece of theology most people can agree upon. The Lord may remit a dew, the reeve may look away from a rabbit caught in a snare, the baker may add a lap of dough to an oven fee and call it a mistake. Your household tells more jokes, smaller ones, because laughter stretches soup. The great mortality, when it comes in some generations, wears a cloak we will not lift here. It is enough to say that the village learns new silence, and then relearns sound. Custom bends, law remembers compassion. The church rings its bell for too many names, and then for fewer, and afterwards fields still ask to be plowed because fields only understand today. Widows manage holdings with a new hand. Children discover that chores arrive earlier than birthdays. Land moves on the map in ways only clerks can explain without crying. In its wake, wages sometimes rise, opportunities step into doorways that used to be closed, and women discover pockets of agency that old rules forgot to police. The year, even after catastrophe, insists on its wheel. Spring blushes as shamelessly as ever. Between dangers are months of almost peace where the work is large only when you measure it all at once. Winter is the season that pretends not to end. It moves in with luggage, cold, dark, an appetite for wood, and asks the house to prove itself. You oblige with mending, with threshing on the floor to the flail's old beat, with winnowing in the barn mouth where the wind becomes an employee. The children help, small arms lifted proudly as chaff reenacts snow. Grain whistles lightly into the chest. Mice reconsider their plans. In late afternoon, the cottage takes a second job as a school. Stitchery taught in the key of patience, letters learned if a clerk is friendly and a child determined, songs stored like seed for evenings that get ideas. The world outside is mostly gray, but indoors the palette is warm. Amber rushlight, red ember, brown bread, wool in all its practical colors. Winter cannot argue with soup, only endure it. Feast days anchor winter like stones, keep a net honest. Candlemas lets you bless flame and pretend to own it. Shrovetide encourages pancakes the size of impossible wishes. Lent learns you how to be clever with cabbage and how to make virtue out of scarcity without bragging. Easter, even if the wind still scolds, wears a ribbon and hands out joy in eggs. May arrives eventually, even if April loiters. The May garland smells like grass writing a poem to itself. You dance if you can, laugh if you can't, and help the older knees to a bench where admiration is a sport. Work fairs travel with the seasons like actors who know their cues. Ditching belongs to the brown months, hedging to the unshowy weeks, spinning to any time your hands need occupation and your feet need to go somewhere else without moving. Fulling and dyeing in some places turn a river section into a discussion between color and footprint. The fulling mallets thump, the paddles slap, the cloths shrinking into sturdiness. This is the sound of wind turned into weatherproof. Dye vats offer blue that looks like sky captured, green that looks like patience made visible, madder red like a blush that forgot to fade. You take pride when a cloak, yours or another's, goes out into January wearing summer's confidence. Pilgrimages lengthen with daylight. A nearby shrine is a morning's walk. A farther one means plans, a borrowed cloak, provisions wrapped in linen, a companion who can keep a reasonable pace, and a secret. You travel hedgerow to hedgerow, parish to parish, collecting accents and hospitality like charms on a ribbon. At bridges you pay small coins or a large smile. At fords you pay attention. In the church at journey's end, candles burn with the same seriousness as those at home, which is always a comfort. You return lighter of heart and slightly heavier of badge, happy to find that your own stew has improved in your absence. It often does. In good years, the wheel's click is music. Barley tumbles into the chest like laughter. Beans make a tidy drum of the sack. The pig grows symmetric and philosophical. The thatch politely ignores every storm's swagger. You host neighbors at your bench with bread that declares good news by its smell alone. You send a child to fetch water because you like the idea of a child returning with it. You pay your dues and find that your shoulders still lower at the end of the week. The Reeves chalk looks less like a threat and more like punctuation. The miller dusts you with flour as if blessing you for making his stones feel useful. In such years you think privately that the world and you have agreed to a treaty with forgiving terms. Yet even the kindest year has its little tragedies. A cow births a still calf and milk remembers sorrow. A late frost leans its cold hand on your plum blossom and you say something unprintable into your sleeve. A child's cough performs more than is strictly necessary for 3 nights, and then, mercifully, gives up drama like a tired actor. The saints of small things, tight knots, quick hands, hot broth, do their work without official portraits. You honor them by learning their names, knot, hand, broth. You also honor them by sleeping when you can, which is more heroic than most songs admit. The calendar of the church plats itself through your field calendar until they are a single sturdy rope. Rogation days bring processions through the sown wheat, singing at the corners so that boundaries become a shared hymn. Lammas blesses loaf and field in one gesture. Michaelmas bids you take stock as the geese grow fat. Martinmas takes a knife to generosity and salt to the cuts, so winter has something to talk to. Advent is a hush with candles. Christmas arrives like a guest who knows where the cups are kept, and though the table is not kingly, it is abundant with gratitude. Epiphany reminds you to look up. You do, and the stars look like pins someone dropped in the velvet. Then the wheel leans forward again, and February takes its practice swings while you count your seeds. In all these chapters, women's work is the weft through which the year's warp must pass. You judge the season by the spindle's rhythm, the brewing schedule, the butter's color, the softness of the child's patched knee. A woman's year is as bound to weather as any plowman's. Milk changes with rain, dough with temperature, dye with the river's mood. The calendar writes itself on her hands. Nettle stings of spring, berry stains of summer, wool grease of autumn, lanolin's soft skin in winter that still cracks at the thumb from water that has opinions. When Catastrophe visits, she is quartermaster and chaplain, nurse and accountant, the one who stretches soup and truth, both gently, so the household can swallow. What of the quiet brave? They are everywhere if you have the right spectacles. The man who puts his own bread down to cut a neighbor's thatch before the sleet arrives. The girl who walks 3 miles with a pie for an aunt who'd been too tired to light her fire. The boy who watches geese with the solemnity of a bishop and brings them home all counted because numbers matter. The grandmother who knows how to make a feverish child laugh through a stupor. The reeve who decides that a fine today would be unhelpful and a warning kinder. The miller who tips an extra scoop at the bottom of your sack and calls it calculation. The priest who carries water for the midwife because theology improves with buckets. None of this enters Chronicles. All of it enters winter safely. By now the year is learning its closing words. Frost hems the lanes with neat stitches. The last apples become sauce. The last pears become story. You burn stubble on a still day, small flames licking old straw like tidying scribes. The fields rest like athletes between heats. You oil the plow and put it to sleep. You sort the seed, sniffing for the smell that says soundness. You count the chest, barley respectful, beans quietly confident, rye with its stern little sermon about caution, oats cheerful and unpretentious. You cover everything with cloth and a hope that is not superstitious, so much as experienced. When snow arrives, it covers the parish with an equalizing hand and forces even the cockiest hill to admit to being a shape under a quilt. Footprints write temporary letters to each other. Fox to henhouse, cat to stable, child to sledding possibility. The river changes its voice. The mill wheel slows, then stops, then sits like a dozing animal. Your cottage grows more inward, more lamplit, more committed to the idea that warm air should stay where it's useful. You split wood and toast your toes and tell the story of the summer's rick that didn't tip in the gale, and you exaggerate respectfully because exaggeration is a blanket too. There will be years when Catastrophe raises its head again, as it always does. There will be years that glide. You will remarry, perhaps. You will bury, certainly. You will watch a child outrun a dog and a grief outrun a house until the house enlarges itself to fit the grief. You will plant anyway. You will harvest anyway. You will sing on saints' days and spend your pennies on salt. You will speak kindly to nettles and firmly to geese. You will put your shoulder to the handles and your faith to the test and discover that the year, like a good cart, moves best when everyone pushes a little together. And then, with almost comic predictability, something green insists. A spear of iris near the ditch. A daft primrose. The first nettle, which you salute before you pick and which salutes you back with its customary manners. The wheel bites down and pulls you into a new year you have known all your life and never before. You step outside and the air smells like wet tin and possibility. The oxen look at you and say forward. The lark writes its punctuation mark on an empty blue. You put your hands on the plow and feel the memory of last year's furrow and next year's bread pass through your palms as if your body were a bridge. At evening, when the horn window dilutes the dark and the hearth sets out its red welcome, you do the accounting not with numbers, but with breath. In for the sowing, out for the harvest. In for the storm's memory, out for the roof's answer. In for the neighbor's hand on the rick, out for the child's laugh in frost. And when you finally lower the latch and fit yourself to the straw that has relearned your outline, you understand that the tyranny of seasons is also the mercy of seasons. They make you belong to something that returns. You sleep with the smell of hay in your hair and the promise of seed in your chest, and the wheel, considerate for once, turns softly while you do not notice. Her first numbers are milk and heat. The cow gives as the season allows, and the pail answers with its bright, ringing arithmetic. Milk warmed near the hearth becomes a decision tree. Drink now, clabber later, skim for butter if cream is brave, begin a small cheese if the weather says yes. She moves by the stove hook, by the simmer, by the sound a wooden spoon makes when it finds the bottom. Butter happens under her palms, patient and rhythmic, and the buttermilk that remains is tomorrow's soup in a hopeful mood. The shelf fills with white rounds salted like sensible advice, wrapped in cloth, turned daily so the rind learns its job. Cheese is a way to teach summer how to last. If the village is a loom, a woman is the shuttle, darting through, holding the pattern together, making sense of threads that would otherwise only be potential. Call her Alis, because the name sits lightly and wears the centuries well. At dawn, when the cock reissues his memo and the horn window pours its first thimble of light, Alis is already at accounting, not with parchment and ink, those belong to stewards and saints, but with hands and habit. The ledger lives in her body. What's sprouting in the garden, what's ripening in the dairy, what the hens intend, what the children require, which neighbor needs a pot of broth left on a doorstep with the label "None of your business." Bread is the other half of the morning. The leaven jar, your grandmother's grandmother once whispered to it, wakes with a quiet bloom. Flour, water, salt, the kneading that looks like prayer but is really planning. How many loaves? Whose oven day? Whether the baker will frown kindly or kindlier. Her fists speak gluten's language. The dough smooths, springy as a good idea. She pricks initials before the loaves go to the communal oven, because even generosity requires labels. When she brings the bread home later, the house smells like the sort of happiness that does not need permission. Spinning crosses all the hours like a faithful refrain. The distaff tucks under Alis's arm the way a bird perches on a trusted branch. Wool in the mass is a landscape. Under her fingers it becomes a lane and then a thread. The spindle hums its soft wheel song as she walks, as she waits, as she listens to the neighbors' weather prophecies that are really stories about people. Some days the yarn is thick and honest. Some days it is fine and patient. Every day it is needed, because cloth is winter's other name. The children learn to card wool by imitation. They raise their little hands, full of fluff and pride, as if offering clouds to be improved. Brewing is industry and hospitality in one copper. Alis mashes in when the barley says now. The cottage fills with the steady malty steam of an old song. Wort runs, hops nudge or herbs stand in where hops are strangers, and yeast, borrowed from a friendly jar or the last froth, goes in like a blessing that knows its job. She keeps watch because ale, like children and stories, benefits from attention. The ale taster may appear with his wooden measure and serious expression. She will pour and try not to smile when he declares it sound. If the brew is good, neighbors learn mysteriously and arrive with something to mend or news to trade. A jug travels farther than people think. In the garden, Alis practices close diplomacy. Peas climb the brushwood as if auditioning for choir stalls. Leeks stand like modest soldiers. Cabbages embrace themselves with admirable self-esteem. She thins, she weeds, she picks. A handful of herbs, sage, thyme, parsley, turn a pot into counsel. On the line by the hedge, she ties onions in strings that look like amber beads on a winter dress. Seeds she saved in August become next April's promises. The soil answers her hands as readily as it answers the plow. Gentler tools, same contract. Poultry are her gossip circle and her pension plan. Hens bustle with the moral authority of small officials. Alis reads their intentions by posture and by mutter. Who is broody? Who is a skeptic? Who thinks the fox is a rumor? She sets the brood hen in a basket with a view and a petition for luck. Eggs clack softly in her palm. She counts them against the week's needs and the market's possibilities. A clutch becomes coin with less argument than wool does, and eggs are portable hope. If a goose chooses to lecture her ankles, Alis retaliates with dignity and a broom. Clothes and home are a long conversation with time. Linens laid on the hedge on wash day lift in the sun like white sails that will never leave the parish and do not wish to. She scours with lye when she can, with hot water when she must, with honesty always. She patches elbows before holes think they are in charge and turns cuffs at the season's hinge. A cloak becomes two hoods. A shirt begets a rag that will one day become a wick. Patching is thrift's poetry, entering at one side, crossing the problem, emerging neat. When she holds up a garment and the light does not gossip through it, she nods to herself, which is the promotion available here. Work follows her into the public eye. Market day, a basket of eggs lined with straw, a twist of yarn, a little cheese if the household can spare it, perhaps a seam of dye plant seeds and a twist of cloth because someone asked last week. She knows which stall holds pins that do not sulk and which knife maker's edges last longer than his jokes. Salt is weighed, and she watches the scale with respectful interest. She trades eggs for onions if coin is shy, or coin for salt if hens have been prolific. She collects news: whose wheat went well, whose child laughed after a fever, whose roof shows daylight. Gossip is a kind of insurance. Information keeps trouble from arriving unannounced. Her ledger of favors is impeccable and entirely invisible. A loaf placed on a sill by evening, a morning spent at a neighbor's churn when their arms went on strike, a skein wound and delivered to a widow with sheep, but no time. In return, strong backs appear when the thatch wants combing. A borrowed cloak arrives for a long walk. Someone's son chops wood as if it were a suitor. Alis keeps no tally sticks for this. She keeps a memory, which is handier and harder to lose. The village runs partly on these small transfers of strength. She is one of its accountants. There is craft the eye does not see unless it knows where to look. The clean shelf is survival. The pot scoured with ash and water is dignity. The knife oiled and hung high is foresight. Even prayer here is practical. Beads counted with the same fingers that count stitches. Petitions threaded through the routine so they do not clatter. At dusk, she sets out the next day in small, quiet acts. Soaking beans, laying out the combed wool, moving the jar of leaven nearer the warm corner, covering the milk with cloth so cats respect boundaries. Children are not only mouths but hands and futures. Alis teaches them as tasks allow. How to card wool without training it to become clouds again. How to shell peas without sampling half the crop into a pocket. How to carry a pail with more water arriving at the hearth than departing at the doorstep. When a child patches their first knee and looks up for approval, she grants it with ceremony, because ceremony is free and lasts. When little feet run messages between cottages, the village's blood moves better. What does a day feel like? Like a braid. Cows and kettles, yarn and yard, oven and errands, each strand crossing not to tangle, but to hold. Hardship is real, fatigue at the bones that tea cannot negotiate. Hands learning the alphabet of chilblains, a back consulted too often by baskets, but there is also the deep relief of competence. Alis knows how to turn thin into enough. She can feed a bad mood with onion and barley until the mood drowses. She can coax bread to rise on a cold day by setting the bowl near a child and declaring both precious. She can read the sky at laundry time and the child at fever time with equal literacy. There are soft jokes, because softness helps tools last longer. She informs the fire that it owes her a song for all this wood. The kettle obliges. She asks the cat to submit a detailed report on mouse activity. The cat files a nap. She addresses the geese as Madam and Sir in hopes of raising standards. She tells the dairy that patience is a spice, then adds salt anyway. The cow remains unmoved but productive. Humor is the shawl she throws over the day's sharper edges. Ale whiffery brings her briefly into law's lamplight. The ale taster's wooden measure and the assize of ale hover at the edge of her work. If the brew is strong as gossip, there may be a fine. If weak as dishwater, another kind of scolding. She learns the sweet middle and keeps there, because fines spend themselves into bread you would rather eat. On busy weeks, she sets a bench outside with cups and a small sign none can read, but all can interpret. For an hour, her threshold is an ala bench, and the village edits its worries with laughter. Birth is the season that interrupts all seasons. When it is her turn, Alis calls the midwife with a message that moves faster than feet. Women arrive with towels warmed by the hearth, with cords and courage. They arrive with stories of their own labors told in tones that turn dread into solidarity. The room narrows to breath and hand, to murmurs that are half prayer, half instruction. When the babe cries, hoarse and indignant at how bright the world is, everyone's spine lengthens by a thumb's breadth. After, broth, sleep, blessings. Work will wait more politely for this than for anything else. Loss happens too, and we turn the volume low. Alis, like others, keeps going by keeping going. She stitches a seam that was in no hurry to become a seam. She rises to stir a pot that would be fine without stirring. She walks to market with a basket that carries grief and eggs with equal steadiness. Women teach each other the liturgy of continuance. A hand on a shoulder, a loaf left at dusk. A name said softly in the porch where stone remembers. The village places a bench in its mind for those who need to rest there before remembering how to stand. When her husband is called to the Lord's work or the road's rumor, or when he simply falls ill, Alis shoulders the rest without announcement. She bargains with the reeve for the timing of owed labor. She minds the strips, she counts seed, she checks the hedge's grammar after a wind. In some years, the law notices her industry and calls it good management. In most, the law shrugs and asks for dues. She keeps going anyway. If widowhood comes, a narrow door of agency opens, and she steps through with care, not because she mistrusts freedom, but because freedom must still fetch water. Work also has its mild glories. A skein dyed a blue so sudden it startles the afternoon. A loaf risen handsomely under a cautious sky. A child reading a prayer from a scrap in a voice that trembles and then steadies. A cloak finished before the wind gets ideas. A cat, finally, behaving like a sheriff. Markets where a song fits the road home and the basket holds 3 good onions after everything is counted. A moment at dusk when the bench fits her back exactly and the day decides to forgive itself. By evening, the ledger of her hands is balanced not just with tasks done, but with a house that behaves like a friend. She bars the door, sets the rushlight, listens for the silent report. Bread cooling, cheese turning, ale thinking, yarn resting, children settled, tools content. If any portion complains, she makes a note with her breath and plans tomorrow from the inside out. The cottage approves with its old wood. The hearth keeps a red coin of heat for night. She lies down on the straw that knows her name, and the bed remembers what the day asked and what it bestowed. From the peg, the distaff leans like a companion waiting for morning. At the threshold, the broom, victorious over goose opinions, stands at ease. In the chest, linen folded fine as hope. Outside, the hens mutter about policy and then sleep. Alis closes her eyes, and the invisible ledger closes too, numbers written in warmth and work. She does not think of history, which is busy elsewhere. She thinks briefly of the opening light, of milk and leaven, of the garden's faithful rose, of the small door she will open again to a day that will greet her by name. A village is a map you carry in your head, and a woman's path across that map is a ribbon that must be tied to many posts. Law, custom, neighbors, weather, and the polite tyranny of time. The lanes are the same for everyone, but the tolls change with who you are. Alis knows this the way she knows where the well-roped frays and which hedge hides a kind blackberry bush. It is not that her world is cruel on purpose. It is that rules were made by people who believed they were describing nature when they were describing their habits. Consider the law as it brushes her sleeve. In many places, after marriage, her legal cover is her husband. His name, the cloak, hung over both their shoulders. The clerk might call it custom, the reeve might call it order, the priest might call it fitting. Alis calls it Tuesday and keeps working. If she brings a cow or a linen chest to the marriage, the things become part of the household, and the household is legally his voice. Yet in practice, the village hears her voice every day. At the market bench over eggs, in the bake-oven queue, at the ale bench when the jug is set out, in the quiet court of back doors where favors are exchanged and remembered with more accuracy than any tally stick. Law sets the frame, custom paints in the details. A household must still live between the two. In the manor court, when hedges and pigs are asked to justify themselves, a woman's presence is ordinary and unremarked, unless it isn't. If Alis is single, widowed, or standing for a husband away on the Lord's work, she can speak, and the clerk's pen records her name with the same iron ink as any man's. If she is married and her spouse stands in the yard, she likely lets his voice carry, and everyone pretends that voices can be divided cleanly from the hands that did the work. Even so, men in caps have a way of glancing at her when garden boundaries are discussed, for hedges respond best to those who plant beans. Property is a word that travels in company, with parchment, with seals, with measuring cords. But small properties, tools, livestock, linen, the famous bread chest, travel under the escort of daily necessity, and in the arithmetic of survival, Alis keeps a ledger no steward could balance better. If she is fortunate, and the law of the place allows, she may hold a little land in her own right, especially if she is a widow or if marriage contracts were carefully whispered over ale. More often, her rights are practical and precise. Grazing for the household cow, a share in the commons, the privilege to gather brushwood, dead and fallen, oven rights on particular days, a place in the mill queue. These are boundaries that matter more than borders drawn in a distant hall. Work guilds in towns, those tight-laced fraternities of craft, open their doors a crack depending on the trade and the city's manners. Widows of guildsmen sometimes inherit the shop's keys and the guild's sighing toleration. A few keep apprentices, a few put their mark on good work and dare anyone to argue with quality. In some trades, brewing, silkwork, embroidery, midwifery, women stand not in the doorway but in the room. In many parishes, the guild is simply an agreement among hands to be paid fairly and to be buried decently, and here a woman's coin weighs as well as any. Alis has no guild charter on her wall, but her reputation is a membership card that never loses its ink, the cheese that keeps, the yarn that holds, the ale that comforts rather than confuses. Midwives are the village's quiet power in aprons. They walk through every door, day or midnight, past candle and panic, carrying a bag more like a toolbox than a charm chest. They know herbs and the rhythm of breath. They know how to turn a breech thought into a forward one. They know when to call for more hands and when to send everyone out, but the mother's patience. If the priest nails a cross to the bed's foot, the midwife nods. If he arrives late, she does not mention it. She names babes in emergencies with a voice that believes in both water and mercy. And when the child thrives, no one remembers the theology that almost objected. The law may list midwives under something small and domestic. The village files them under necessary. There are other women's trades that fit in the cracks between seasons and make the world gentler. Dyers with their pots that smell like secrets, coaxing blues out of plants that merely look green. Fullers who crease their skirts above the river's edge and tramp cloth into stubbornness. Shearers whose hands read sheep like books. Spinners who never stop. Weavers who count warp and weft by feel when the candle sighs low. Healers who keep leech books in their heads because vellum is rare. and recipe books in their cupboards because honey and vinegar are generous conspirators. These crafts do not always come with banners, but they come with bread. Boundaries exist in other places too, in doorways, in porches, in the place between public and private that women move across like diplomats. The church porch is a court and a market of speech, a place where bargains are proposed with folded arms and concluded with hands that smell of flour. Alice knows the porch's acoustics. She can hear a hint of trouble in a neighbor's voice and offer help before trouble grows enough to be proud. She can ask for a small grace without the flinch that asks permission to exist. She can arrange that a boy with good hands be placed with the smith, that a girl with a quick eye sit with the dyer, that a widow's woodpile grow taller without naming its benefactors. The porch is parliament and parliament is porch. Slander and comfort both attempt to pass. Alice has a sieve ready. Faith looks like candles and Latin at a distance. Close up, it looks like bread and neighbors. She says her prayers with fingers that have learned to count stitches, and the saints she prefers are workmanlike. A Saint Anne who understands teaching, a Saint Bridget who takes fire seriously, a Mary who knows how kitchens fit around miracles. Fasting seasons tell the pot how to behave politely with peas. Feast days remind the oven to dream big. Confession, when there is time to cross the threshold and the priest's mood is human, can sound like a gardener reporting on weeds. Absolution sounds like the wind changing its mind. The churchyard ewes stand like patient ushers to all of this, whispering to no one and keeping every secret. In law books where kings are comfortable, slander and assault against women have penalties, and sometimes those penalties are even applied. In villages where the road is the courtroom, reputation is a fence that keeps out goats and invites bees. A woman's good name is a currency so pourable it must be measured in careful pours. Alice protects hers with competence more than with silence. It is safer to be indispensable than it is to be invisible. She will not raise her voice at the bake oven or the mill except to defend fairness. She will raise it gladly over a child near water. She picks her battles with the attention she gives to picking mushrooms. She leaves the dangerous ones on the ground. Marriage can be a sturdy bridge or a plank over a ditch. Many unions are simply partnerships with sore backs. Affection grows like moss, small and soft, over necessity's stones. Some are worse, and the lane knows which door to hurry past on certain evenings. Where custom or priest offers counsel, it is often the midwife who truly mediates. Older, steady, a woman whose authority arrives not from books, but from having stood at the hinge of life too many times to tolerate silliness. If danger grows tall, the village knows ways to lean. A brother arrives with a spade precisely when the fence needs fixing. A reeve calls in a debt of labor at just the hour that would prevent a blow. Neighbors sit on a bench within earshot to collapse distance into safety. None of this has a seal or a motto, but it works as often as kindness gets the chance. Widowhood is the thinnest freedom and the strongest school. If it comes, Alice steps into a space with more decisions and fewer hands. The law may allow her to hold land until a son grows shoulders, or to keep the shop going because it is better for the parish to have shoes. She will bargain with stewards not as a supplicant, but as a colleague with different tools. She inventories cows, hens, seed, debts, favors, then sets the day. A widow's bench sees much mending and many decisions. She may sign with a mark on parchment held down by a priest's book, but she signs with full handwriting on every loaf, every yard of cloth, every winter survived without letting the roof forget its job. In time, if she chooses, she may marry again for the help, the company, or the sheer practicality of two yokes on one plow. Or she may not, and the village will nod because competence is the language everyone speaks. Travel is a boundary that moves when you do. Alice's world is big enough to include the next parish and small enough to know the shape of every puddle near the ford. Yet roads exist, and she sometimes takes them, not like a pilgrim with a banner, but like a merchant with a basket or a mother with a purpose. She knows which hedges slant toward kindness, which inns make a bed that forgives the day. At fairs, she stands before wares made elsewhere and translates their beauty into hours of yarn. A ribbon becomes part of a year's arithmetic. A spool of thread becomes 3 days of spinning saved. She walks home counting stitches in her head, decides the spindle can have a holiday, and lets the lark do the counting. The household court her own has rules and precedents. Shoes must be where shoes can be found by feet that overestimate dawn. Knives must answer to their names. The leaven jar is a legal minor protected from drafts and mischief. A sick child has universal jurisdiction over milk and lap. Geese have limited rights and the broom has universal enforcement powers. The cat is a free city-state with treaties about mice. And when guests come, chairs appear from unlikely corners, and the table grows 6 inches by everyone sitting a smidge more kindly. No clerk records these laws, but they are obeyed with a discipline that would make a marshal proud. There are bargains with the natural world that only long patience teaches. Wool will not if scolded. It prefers persuasion. Milk will turn if underestimated. It prefers respect and cool corners. Dough listens to the weather more than to arguments. It prefers warm encouragement. Children are like dough in this way, only with louder opinions. Men can be like oxen, best with clear signals and a path cleared of unnecessary obstacles, though they do enjoy being told they are horses sometimes. Sorrow is a winter guest who prefers to sit near the door. You give it a stool and don't press conversation. Joy is shy and arrives by the back gate. You leave it unlocked. If there is danger in being a woman here, there is also dignity, not the heraldic kind, but the bread and salt kind. Aelis's power lives in continuance. The pot that never refuses, the cloth that appears warm when the child gives up pretending not to be cold, the bench that gains room for one more without grumbling. She does not seek permission to be necessary. She simply is. And the village, practical as a broom, recognizes necessity. When justice is too slow to bring its official book, the village brings its unofficial one. There are words that move people: fair, neighborly, shame. These are the 3 candles that light up the back lane. Aelis uses 2 often and saves the 3rd for when a man's conscience needs a little smoke. She will say neighbor the way a smith says iron, not as a description, but as a category of work. She will say fair the way a baker says heat, continuous, adjusted, the thing that makes all other things possible. On the days when the law is a fence and not a gate, she finds the gate hidden in the hedge, a complaint phrased as a question, a refusal delivered as a suggestion, a no softened into a not today that leaves dignity unbruised. It is not trickery, it is geometry, finding angles where force would only break the stick. She is not always successful. Some days the stick breaks. Those are the nights when bread is cut a little thicker, when stories are told a little longer, when the bench learns what shoulders are for. If history wrote fairly, it would footnote every small triumph. The hedged path kept open through negotiation. The child taught letters by chalk on a table. The taking in of a niece with stubborn lungs. The steadying of a man who returned from a war he never saw, full of mud and words that would not arrange themselves. It would footnote the time Aelis stood before the steward and said evenly that the oven fee could be paid in dough or in cloth, and that cloth would be wiser because winter has fingers. It would footnote the midnight she and the midwife sat with a woman at a difficult hour and kept a candle going, not because it did anything to the womb, but because it did something to the room. It would footnote the morning she opened the door, counted the loaves, and decided everyone must eat before worry did. Power here is the ability to keep tomorrow possible. Aelis has that power the way the hearth has heat. It is not absolute, but it is persuasive. Her tools are agreements, with cows, with clouds, with neighbors, with saints who answer best to practical prayers. Her threats, when needed, are equally practical, a raised eyebrow at a miller who must live among people. a pointed silence to a reeve who remembers that fines do better work when spoken softly, a tray of eggs delivered to the steward's wife at the exact moment when influence enjoys breakfast. When evening settles its shawl, the village is a collection of little sovereignties, doorways lit by small flames, laughter folded into porches, quarrels muffled by bread. Alice closes her door with the attention she gives to everything that keeps weather out and warmth in. She listens for the house's brief reports, clink from the pot as it cools, sigh from the loaf, tiny murmurs from sleeping children like secret meetings of very serious persons. She rests in a chair that knows her spine and lets sleep draft her into its soft militia. Tomorrow the boundaries will still be there. The common's edge, the oven day, the mill's toll, the church's tenth, the steward's chalk, the law's long arm and short reach. Tomorrow, too, will offer its negotiable places, the kindness at the bake oven, the bargain in the porch, the neighbor who says, "Take mine," the sky that decides to be merciful for at least the afternoon. She will walk her ribbon of road again, tying it to what needs tying and loosening it where it pinches. She will make a coin's worth of butter and a purse's worth of friendship. She will turn grain into bread and moments into safety. And when she lies down, the straw will remember her, as it remembers all who dared ordinary courage. The bed will hold the shape of her work and the shape of her rest equally, and the hearth will keep one red eye open on her behalf. In that soft accounting, the law and the ledgers grow quiet, and only the useful columns remain. Bread enough, warmth enough, kindness enough. Outside, the village whispers itself to sleep, geese reducing policy to mutter, the river to a thoughtful thread, the mill to a held breath. Inside, Alice's day folds shut like a letter to morning, sealed with wool, smoke, and the faint sweet tang of cooling bread. And so our journey for tonight comes to a quiet close. The story lingers, like the last glow of candlelight, as you drift further into rest. If these gentle wanderings bring you peace, I invite you to like and subscribe so that whenever you wish, you may return, and we can travel together once more. For now, dear listener, may your dreams be kind and your night be restful. Until next time.